Hello, parents and teachers who may be watching. Welcome to Creating Math Ahas for Parents. I'm Dr. Sandy Atkins, Sandy, and in this video, I'd like to have us look a bit at counting patterns and think about the kinds of imagery we use to help your children recognize patterns, describe patterns, and then eventually use these patterns when they compute. So let's start with just the counting forward 1 to 10. There are certain number words that have to be memorized, but we want to try to associate them with quantity as much as possible. So the number words for 1 to 10, that's one set of words your child must learn. And notice how I'm choosing to use a 5 frame. Now, you'll notice we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nothing says that I have to fill them in that order, top to bottom, right? I could have filled them in any order and it still would end up being 3 or 4 or 5. So that's important for that flexibility. And notice how I'm building the numbers 6, 7, 8, 9 in relation to 5. So it's 5 and 1, 5 and 2, 5 and 3, right? For 8, 9. So I've got that as an underlying visual as well as the count, okay? The other one I could use would be a 10 frame, and I could have filled the dots in any order, any arrangement, but I want to eventually know the filled frame is 10, and we can again go forward and backwards at any point. So you might see a 10 frame representation as looking at the numbers 1 to 10 and those representations, and we're practicing our counting sequence again. I could also use a domino dot sequence, right? 4, 5, 6. And what we want is your child to recognize a 6 without having to stop to count each of those pips, right? Each dot. So we can do that forward and backwards. With the slides, it's easy enough to change it up and I'll be going forward for a while and backwards and get that comfort at any point they can do a counting sequence forward and backwards. Now, the next set of numbers that your children need to learn and memorize are the teen numbers. And I'd like to show you some of those ways we can look at teen numbers. So now notice how I'm using a single 10 frame and I'm looking at 11, 10 and 12 and 13, 10 and. So this is expanded form. And they're learning the names 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, right? Right on up until we get to 20. Then there's the decade numbers. So learning those number names 1 to 10 and associated imagery, adding in the teen numbers, and then thinking about the decade numbers. So we can count by tens starting at 10 and learn those decade numbers, right, until we get up to 100. We could count within a decade then. So once I know the number words 1 to 10, and then the teen number words and the decade number words, and we're adding in that bonus of the imagery, then it's all about patterns, right? I want your child to understand that I can count within any decade. It's a pattern. I don't have to memorize all those number words. It's about patterning. So I could start at 30, and we've got 31, 32, 33, and I could practice going forwards and backwards. But when I get 38, 39, right? So I counted within that decade 30. What if I start with 70? Well, 71, 72, 73. That pattern will continue. And I could pick any decade, and it's still going to go 81, 82. 21, 22, 23, right? That pattern repeats. And so I want your child to understand the patterns that occur within a decade. And then what is quite challenging for many children is what happens across the decade, right? It's transitioning from a number in the 30s to a number in the 40s. I've got here 67. And so many of your children, we could start 67. I know it's 68, 69. They may get 70, right? But they really do get it when they see the images. But what happens with some children is once they say 70, then they'll go 80, 90, and they'll start counting by tens. That's very common. So that's another reason we want the imagery there so they can see what's coming next, right? So I'm counting across the decade. I've transitioned from numbers in the 60s to go into numbers in the 70s. Different here. We can start with 28, same idea, 29, 30, 31, and I can go forward and backwards across that decade mark, sorry, and get them comfortable with those transitions. So we learned some number words, really 1 to 19. We learned the decade words. We think about patterns within the decade, and then we help with the transition across the decades. And then there's that counting by tens with an anywhere start. This really gets into some of the other patterns, but helps your child with plus or minus 10, adding by tens onto anything, adding a 1 or subtracting a 1 from any number. Now, think about it. I could start at 2, and I've got 12, 22, 32. What would 10 more be? So the image helps me with what would 10 fewer be? See, it's very clear what's going on. And I happen to use 10 frames for these examples, right? So I can skip count by tens with an anywhere start. What if I start at 7? See, originally I could do this with no numerals, but once they do it, see, I can start adding in the numerals when they're counting, or they write the numerals. And once you get these numerals showing, now it's about what do you notice about these? What pattern do you see? And we start to see that when we count by tens, the ones place stays the same. That digit didn't change. But the tens place continues to increase by 1. We've got that pattern. I could do the same idea with fives, right? We work on counting by fives, and I can use the 5-10 frame connection to count by fives. Take them right up to 100 or go beyond 100 because that's a hard transition for them. But they're seeing that 5 added in, and it helps them see that numbers divisible by 5, this is the foundation, numbers divisible by 5 end in a 5 or end in a 0. So it builds imagery for what they'll do later with divisibility rules. And then I can do the same idea with an anywhere start. Let's say we start at 18 and count by fives. 18, 23, 38, 33, 30. Sorry, I've got to start again, don't I? 18, 23, 28, 33, 38, 43, 48. Okay. And they start to see that pattern going. But it's more clear when we write the numeral under it. 18, 23, 28, 33, 38. Now you know what's coming next. We're going to ask your children to look at it and what patterns do they notice? What do they see? And notice how the tens place is similar to counting by tens. That's going to increase by 1 each time, but as we go across, right? But the ones place alternates between 2 different digits, right? That halfway point, and then back on 10 more. Halfway between, 10 more. So you have the 23, 28, 33, 38. And we want your children to see the pattern, but also hear it when they're saying it. And we can use these images. Now, in all of these, I can do, I've used the tens frames as the image, but I could have used base 10 blocks. So here I'm starting at 28, 38, 48. So I could use base 10 blocks. I could either have them on the screen like I'm doing, or I could actually use physical base 10 blocks. But in all of this, I'm using those images, and we're trying to help your child not just see the numerals, but visualize the quantity that goes with those numerals too. So this is a way to help us. It helps with the plus or minus 10. Some of your children later would use a number line model and do some counting there and some other models. But you see, there's more to counting than just memorizing all those words. It's about the patterning, and the patterning is going to help us again with the computation. So I hope you found this video helpful. If so, please give it a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing. And that said, thank you to those of you who have recently subscribed. I really appreciate it. Turn on the notifications bell and then you'll know when new videos are posted. I typically post those on Tuesday afternoons here. So look for new videos on Tuesdays, but if you turn on the notifications bell, you'll know when they're available. I really appreciate, again, you subscribing, you taking time to like or leave a comment. If there's other ideas you'd like to hear about, please put it in the comments below. And I'll leave a link to another video where I talk about cardinality, the complexity for your young children in learning to count and what's involved in that and what cardinality is. That's a kindergarten idea typically. So again, thanks so much for watching.